Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this built-in expectation of structural precision.
Right, like a very clear binary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You fall, your arm swells up, you go get an x-ray, the image pops up on the screen, and you see that stark, jagged white line across the
The
bone.
doctor just taps the screen like, there's the fracture.
Yeah, there it is. It's entirely binary. It's broken or it's whole. And I think we crave that kind of visible, categorized certainty in almost every aspect of our lives.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
We build entire societal frameworks around that craving for categorization.
Hmm.
It it provides this false sense of control, really.
Hmm.
Like, if we can label the break, we assume we know exactly how to set the cast.
Right. But the moment you step out of the orthopedic ward and into, say, the landscape of neurodevelopment or systemic societal trauma or even spiritual fracture, that x-ray machine just shatters.
Yeah, it becomes useless.
Completely. The diagnostic landscape gets incredibly murky. You are no longer looking at clean breaks, you're looking at invisible fault lines.
And navigating those requires a totally different kind of tool.
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating stack of primary source documents today, detailing a modern spiritual movement emerging in Israel called BABASHUVA.
It is a wild ride, honestly.
It really is. Our specific mission for this session is to map out the core message of BABASHUVA for you, particularly if you are encountering it for the first time. We want to really analyze its radical vision for reshaping Israeli society into this completely non-hierarchical structure.
Right, because we are essentially dissecting a comprehensive architecture here. It's manifestos, theological principles, digital broadcasts, moral declarations.
All of it.
Yeah, these texts are basically attempting to completely rewrite the operating system of human interaction, like both interpersonally and in relation to the divine.
And to understand the sheer ambition of this, you really have to look at the current operating system we're all running on.
Right, which is pretty chaotic.
Say the least. We exist in a climate of severe polarization, navigating incredibly rigid social, political, and religious hierarchies. We communicate through screens that, filter our humanity into digital avatars.
So I've already disconnected.
Yeah. And into this specific modern chaos, Baba Shuva proposes a literal, visceral return to basic humanity. It demands stripping away all that institutional noise to expose the bare bones of the human condition.
But before we get into the mechanics of how they actually propose to do this, we need to establish the parameters of our analysis today.
Yes, very important.
Because the foundational texts we're unpacking contain profound, often really confrontational theological and social claims.
Yeah, they do not hold back.
No, not at all. They present this aggressive critique of established mainstream religion, systemic hierarchy, and basically all modern societal structures.
Because of that, we want to explicitly state our position as your guides through this material today. We are maintaining absolute neutrality.
100%.
We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing Baba Shuver, and we are not endorsing its critiques of traditional faith frameworks or contemporary culture.
Right. We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our sole purpose today is to impartially report on the contents of the provided sources, to decode the internal logic of this material, and to help you understand the mechanics of this deeply fascinating perspective.
We're just looking at the blueprints of their worldview.
Ah.
Our job is to understand how the walls bear the weight of their philosophy, nothing more.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to comprehend a movement that seeks to dismantle all hierarchy, you have to study the architect who drew up the plans.
Right, the founder.
Let's look at the origins of Baba Shuva, and specifically the deeply unconventional trajectory of its founder.
Yeah, the biography of Natan, or Ben Zvi, is basically the Rosetta Stone for the entire movement.
It really is.
He was born in 1991, originally named simply Or. And if you want to understand the mechanics of why Baba Shuva emerged with such a militant, anti-hierarchical stance, you really have to trace his movement across vastly different societal strata.
Well, and the timeline begins with this catalyst of pure mysticism, right?
Right. At age 10, he enters the religious world. But the sources indicate this wasn't just a slow cultural drift within a family. It was triggered by his mother experiencing a profound dream about his late grandfather, Binyamin Amba.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in that dream, the grandfather specifically called the child Natan Or.
Which is a huge deal. I mean, that kind of naming narrative carries immense sociological and theological weight.
Oh, absolutely. Receiving an expanded name through a post-mortem vision instantly places the child's identity outside the bounds of normal bureaucratic naming conventions.
It roots his identity in revelation.
Exactly. And from that mystical entry point, he spends years deeply immersed in the yeshiva system. He is submerged in the most rigorous, textual, and strictly hierarchical environment imaginable.
Right, so he internalizes the architecture of institutional religion, but then he goes, quote, out of the question. He leaves that framework entirely.
Which is a massive paradigm shift.
And his subsequent professional trajectory is where the whiplash really sets in. From 2017 to the present, the documents note he is working in the capital markets, specifically in portfolio management.
Right. Just consider the ontological shift there. He moves from the intricate legalism of Talmudic study to the absolute pinnacle of hyper-capitalist structure.
It's night and day.
Totally. The sources describe this environment as intense, cold, and realistic. In portfolio management, human endeavor, risk, and value are distilled into pure quantitative metrics.
Yeah, it is an environment where hierarchy is absolute, dictated entirely by yield and capital.
But then simultaneously, from 2022 to 2024, he undergoes training and works as a caregiver for the Ministry of Welfare in a rehabilitation village.
I have spent a lot of time thinking about the cognitive dissonance of that dual existence. I mean, just picture it.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
During the day, you might be analyzing market fluctuations, operating in a system that views humans as economic variables. Then you transition to bathing, feeding, and supporting highly vulnerable individuals who hold zero capital power.
None at all.
You are confronted with the raw, fragile reality of the human body. How do these two extremes birth a spiritual movement?
Well, I think the synthesis of those two extremes is exactly what generates it. When you observe human nature from the apex of abstract wealth creation, and then immediately from the bedrock of physical dependence and vulnerability, the artificiality of societal status becomes glaringly obvious.
That makes a lot of sense.
The text described the result of this dual perspective as a practical prophecy.
Practical prophecy, that is a brilliant linguistic pairing.
It really grounds it.
It grounds the transcendent right in the mud of daily life. Because this movement didn't launch in the boardrooms of Tel Aviv or the ancient courtyards of Jerusalem.
Right. It officially launched on July 27, 2018 in Ofakim.
Which is key. Emerging from Ofakim is a deliberate statement of geographic and demographic placement. It is firmly rooted in the periphery.
Yeah, a movement intent on collapsing the hierarchical center inherently must originate from the margins.
Exactly. But the geographical periphery is mirrored by a psychological periphery. Nate Knorr's journey into practical prophecy is intertwined with what the sources describe as severe mental challenges.
And the texts are remarkably transparent about this. They don't obscure his psychological state at all. They foreground it.
Yeah, they explicitly use the clinical term schizophrenia.
They do, and they detail paranoid visions, specifically an encounter with an entity referred to as Angel Leo.
Which is fascinating because what is striking is the refusal to pathologize this experience in the traditional Western sense.
Right. They elevate it into theology. This is codified in Principle 8 of the movement, which asserts that prophecy is often the direct result of intense mental challenges or severe emotional and psychological experiences.
So they're executing a massive reframing of cognitive divergence.
Exactly. In the clinical hierarchy, a fractured mind is heavily medicated and managed. But in the framework of BABASHUVA, the fracturing of the normative psychological filter is precisely what allows unmediated divine truth to penetrate.
It strips the authority away from the psychiatrist and returns it to the mystic.
Right.
It suggests that what we call sanity is just a rigid filter that blocks out actual reality. And the reality they are trying to tune into is embedded in the name of the movement itself. Let's break down BABASHUVA.
Sure. So the nomenclature is divided into two conceptual halves. Baba translates to father.
Like a patriarch.
Well, the texts contextualize this not as an authoritarian patriarch, but as a loving, compassionate guiding force. It is framed as the ultimate spiritual anchor and the source of life.
Okay, got it. And the second part?
Shuga stems from the concept of teshuva. While often translated simply as repentance, the movement defines it as a literal return, like a self-correction, a realignment with the straight path, and a profound recognition of inner truth.
So you fuse those concepts together, and BABASHUVA becomes a mandate to return to the original source code of humanity, guided by a compassionate anchor rather than a punitive institution.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the operational core of their philosophy. I mean, we know the founder, we know the origin. But how does this movement actually intend to dismantle the structures we currently live in?
This transition from personal revelation to societal architecture rests entirely on one highly concentrated slogan. It basically functions as the ultimate manifesto for the entire movement.
Right, the beating heart of it all.
Hmm.
Under the flesh, we are all human. In Hebrew, Tachat Habasar Kulanu Adam.
Yes.
And, when you first read it, it kind of has the cadence of a bumper sticker.
It does sound a bit simple at first glance.
But the deeper you dig into the sources, the more you realize this isn't just a call for empathy. It is a weaponized philosophical concept.
Oh, completely. The text explicitly designates this phrase as an ontological declaration. It is a fundamental claim about the very nature of existence.
So it's not just a nice thought, it's stating a literal truth.
Right. By asserting, under the flesh we are all human, BABASHUVA is aggressively targeting the complex, calcified layers of Israeli society.
They are attacking all of it. The sectoral divides, the religious versus secular demarcations, the nationalistic boundaries, and the economic stratifications.
Going back to our earlier thought, it functions exactly like that medical X-ray machine, but applied to sociology.
Yeah, that X-ray doesn't care about the designer clothes of your social class. It doesn't register the specific uniform of your religious sect or the political bumper sticker on your car.
It penetrates all of that performative identity and only registers the fragile calcium-based skeleton underneath.
It exposes the structural reality that we are all constructed identically and equally vulnerable to breaking.
And if you accept the premise of that X-ray vision, the sociological implications are immediate and severe. The vision document draws a direct line from this physical reality to a moral absolute. It states that because everyone shares this fundamental equality beneath the flesh, and everyone is created in God's image, there is zero justification for violence, humiliation, oppression, or systemic control over another person.
Wow.
Yeah, the text uses a very specific phrasing. It says, man precedes all ideology.
Man precedes all ideology. I mean, that completely inverts how modern political and religious systems operate.
It really does. Usually the ideology is supreme, and the human is just the fuel used to advance that ideology.
Right. If the ideology demands conflict, the human is expected to sacrifice themselves or others for it. But BABASHUVA argues that the flesh and blood human standing in front of you is the foundational truth.
And any ideology that requires you to humiliate or control that human is inherently false.
It is a total eradication of coercive power dynamics. But, this introduces a profound structural paradox within the movement itself.
A massive one.
You have a founder claiming prophetic visions, publishing a manifesto, and laying down absolute theological laws. Yet the clarification section of their documents violently insists that they are not an institution.
Yeah, they are incredibly defensive about this. They state categorically, BABASHUVA is not a new religion. It is not a cult. It is not a mission. And it is absolutely not a personality cult centered around net and or.
So they are demanding a massive restructuring of human behavior, but refusing to build the bureaucratic machinery that normally enforces that behavior.
Because institutions are the ultimate engines of hierarchy. They require gatekeepers, administrators, clerics, followers.
Right.
By explicitly rejecting the institutional form, BABASHUVA is demanding unmediated human moral responsibility. Like in a traditional structure, morality is often outsourced to the institution.
Yeah, you obey the rabbi, you follow the party whip, you adhere to the cultural norm, and the institution absorbs the moral liability.
You can hide behind the uniform. If you do something harmful but was sanctioned by the hierarchy, you feel absolved.
Right, but BABASHUVA removes the uniform and the hierarchy entirely. Accountability becomes direct, personal, and absolute.
You are individually responsible to God and to your own conscience for every interaction, every word, and every attempt to control another human being. There is no intermediary to grant you permission or absolution.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because asserting that there is no institution and no middleman sounds liberating in theory, but we are talking about applying this in the context of Judaism.
Right, which is highly structured.
Exactly. You cannot simply politely ask a 2,000-year-old, infinitely complex legal and textual hierarchy to step aside.
No, you can't.
To achieve this non-hierarchical vision, BABASHUVA has to execute a theological bypass of unprecedented scale.
And they perform this bypass through a mechanism of absolute biblical literalism. They entirely discard 2 millennia of rabbinic and Talmudic tradition.
Let's pause and map out the sheer gravity of that move.
It's massive.
The Talmud, the thousands of pages of commentary, the centuries of halakhic rulings, that is the structural steel of mainstream Orthodox Judaism.
Absolutely.
That vast legal framework is what necessitates the hierarchy. You need scholars to interpret it, rabbis to rule on it, and courts to enforce it. Baba Shuva looks at that entire towering edifice and completely dismantles it.
They identify those millennia of tradition not as a deepening of divine will, but as the very mechanism that generated religious hierarchy, political division, and systemic control.
So what's their alternative?
Their solution is to revert straight to the Tanakh, the original Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
treating it as the sole, uncorrupted transmission of divine instruction.
And the sources provide a highly tangible example of how this alters daily practice, specifically regarding the observance of Shabbat.
Right, the Sabbath.
In the mainstream tradition, the laws governing the Sabbath fill massive volumes. There are excruciatingly detailed debates and rulings about the use of electricity, the parameters of carrying objects in public domains, the exact methods of food preparation, all legislated by a continuous chain of religious authorities.
But BABASHUVA's approach to Shabbat is derived exclusively from the literal biblical text, entirely ignoring the subsequent centuries of rabbinic expansion.
Which is just a huge pivot.
Yeah. Their stated objective is to cleanse the religious experience of what they term identity politics and the noise of the religious establishment. They want to strip religion down to pure moral imperatives and direct prophetic connection.
The critique of the mainstream goes really far in these texts.
It does. I mean, Principle 3 states unequivocally that every single religion existing in our world today is fundamentally mistaken in its thoughts regarding the true nature of God.
And Principle 6 diagnostics why this happens. They call it the illusion of faith.
Right. Humans claim to believe in God, but in practice, they only believe in themselves.
Yeah, the texts argue that humans utilize the architecture of religion as a mirror to reflect and amplify their own ego, possessing no genuine connection to the divine at all.
And Principle 9 explicitly claims Nathan Orr is a true prophet while contrasting him against the established religious authorities, the rabbis. The text claims they, quote, broadcast lies in his name and do not speak his words truly at all.
So if they are stripping away all this tradition and hierarchy and calling the establishment a lie, what exactly is left holding the framework together? What are the actual rules?
That is the eternal vulnerability of any movement like this. When you obliterate the hierarchy of people and institutions, you create a massive organizational vacuum.
Right. History suggests you don't automatically achieve pure morality. You often get absolute fragmentation.
Exactly. So BABASHUVA attempts to fill that vacuum, not by rebuilding an administrative hierarchy, but by establishing an intensely rigid, unyielding framework of personal theological and moral codes.
So the cohesion doesn't come from a rabbinic court. It comes from absolute adherence to their specific 10 principles and what serves as their new 10 commandments.
Yes, we need to synthesize these theological rules outlined in the sources. They begin with absolute, uncompromising monotheism.
Right. Principle 1 affirms that God is one, directly echoing the foundational declaration of the Shema Yisrael.
And then Principle 2 immediately defines the epistemological boundaries of this faith. It states God's existence is completely unprovable by human metrics, yet simultaneously undeniable to the human soul.
It demands comfort with paradox. You cannot validate it in a laboratory, but you cannot escape it in your consciousness.
But then they escalate from defining God to actively critiquing human cognition. Principles 4 and 5 establish that God exists entirely beyond the parameters of human understanding.
And the text goes even further, asserting that the human intellect is, in fact, our greatest deception, crippled by its inherent limitations.
That is a staggering claim in the 21st century.
It really is. We have essentially deified the human intellect. We believe our brains can categorize the universe, engineer perfect societies, and rationalize literally any behavior.
But BABASHUVA argues that your intellect is actually a trap. It is the very tool that builds the hierarchies, justifies the oppression, and creates the illusions that separate us from the flesh and bone reality.
Which leads perfectly into Principle 7, which I find to be the most piercing diagnostic of our specific modern era.
What's that one?
It states that tangible reality is considered truth, while digital reality is perceived as a lie.
Oh, wow.
If the intellect is a trap, the digital world is the ultimate manifestation of that trap. It's a purely intellectual construct devoid of flesh and blood.
So to find truth, you have to log off and return to the physical world.
Exactly. And how you behave in that physical world is dictated by their new behavioral matrix, the 10 Commandments of BABASHUVA.
These directives replace the traditional biblical decalogues with a hyper-focused, incredibly visceral set of prohibitions.
I'm going to read this list precisely as it appears in the sources. Notice how abrasive and direct this language is compared to the abstract theological commandments we are accustomed to.
Go for it.
Do not stab, do not shoot, do not kill, do not put to death, do not masturbate, do not cry, do not prostitute, do not betray, do not rape, do not seduce or solicit.
Analyzing this list really requires us to look at the mechanics of the language. The immediate standout is the intense, granular fragmentation of physical violence.
Yeah, it's very specific.
A traditional code might simply command, "Thou shalt not kill," leaving the methodology abstract. BABASHUVA forces the adherent to confront the specific, mechanical realities of violence. Do not stab, do not shoot.
It is impossible to read "do not stab and do not shoot" without contextualizing it within the specific daily realities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the trauma of terrorism, and the militarization of society.
Exactly.
It takes the philosophical concept of murder and forces you to look at the knife and the gun. It removes any linguistic loophole that an ideology might use to justify violence.
Right. By breaking violence down into its mechanical components, it strips away the intellect's ability to rationalize it.
You cannot argue about the geopolitical necessity of an action if the absolute law simply says, "do not shoot."
The intellect might justify killing for a righteous cause, but it is much harder to justify the intimate, visceral act of stabbing.
But the second half of the list executes a radical pivot inward. We transition instantly from "do not put to death" to "do not masturbate" and "do not cry."
Which is a jarring juxtaposition.
Very. On the surface, placing the prohibition of crying next to the prohibition of murder seems absurd. But if we dig into the underlying philosophy of the movement, what does this reveal about their focus on human agency?
It reveals an absolute demand for internal regulation. We discussed how BABASHUVA removes the external institution, making you entirely responsible for your actions. That profound level of external responsibility requires an equally profound level of internal sovereignty. Do not masturbate targets the surrender to physical impulse. It demands that you maintain mastery over your physiological drives rather than allowing them to master you.
So it is about not being a slave to the body.
Yes.
But "do not cry" is the one that really forces the double take. I mean, we exist in a culture of therapeutic release where crying is championed as healthy and necessary.
Oh, completely.
To prohibit crying is to reject that entire modern psychological framework. Why ban tears?
Because within the hyper-responsible framework of BABASHUVA, crying can be interpreted as a surrender to emotional despair.
Ah, I see.
If your mandate is to actively see the human under the flesh, to dismantle hierarchy, and to maintain strict moral integrity in a broken world, you do not have the luxury of paralyzing sorrow.
Crying in this specific context might be viewed as an abdication of duty, like a signal that you have given up the active work of repair.
Exactly. You must maintain absolute control over your emotional state to execute your moral responsibilities. It is a rejection of victimhood and emotional indulgence.
You cannot collapse because the human in front of you needs you to be present and accountable.
And the final commands: do not prostitute, betray, rape, seduce, or solicit. They all center on the violation of trust and the commodification of the human body.
You cannot use another person as an instrument for your gratification because doing so fundamentally denies their equal humanity under the flesh.
So what does this all mean? We are looking at a movement that demands the eradication of societal hierarchy, insists on the absolute primacy of the physical human over any ideology, enforces a rigid code of internal and external regulation, and explicitly declares that the digital world is a lie.
Which brings us to the ultimate operational paradox of BABASHUVA. If digital reality is a lie and the intellect is a deception, how do you propagate this philosophy to a global population in the 21st century?
Right. You can't just stand in the town square in Ofakim and shout.
No, you have to infiltrate the matrix. Despite their theological rejection of the digital illusion, their delivery methodology is exceptionally hypermodern.
They are deploying a comprehensive, multi-platform digital campaign. The sources outline a massive digital footprint. They utilize AI-generated songs. They maintain active presences on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
They are using the very architecture of the lie to broadcast their truth.
It is a deeply pragmatic calculation. If the entire global population is currently submerged in the digital illusion, you cannot wake them up from the outside. You have to inject the awakening signal directly into their feed.
And the structure of this signal is built upon three foundational pillars. Pillar one is the Tanakh, the traditional Hebrew Bible, providing the ancient, uncorrupted bedrock.
Right.
Pillar two is the book, specifically the 2024 full edition titled BABASHUVA New World, New Reality.
And the sources describe this text as being authored in a rich, poetic biblical style, yet it is actively diagnosing and addressing contemporary 21st century issues. It serves as the modern operating manual.
And pillar three is where their digital strategy becomes truly fascinating. It is their audio broadcast, titled Podcasts from Heaven.
The sources are highly specific about the production of this podcast. It is funded and hosted by Netan or Ben Zvi, but the vocal delivery is handled by someone else.
Yeah, it is narrated by the, quote, soothing and calming voice of George Kite. And it's distributed on mainstream platforms like Spotify. Why utilize a surrogate voice? Why doesn't the prophet simply deliver the message himself?
Because the objective is not to agitate the intellect. The objective is to bypass it.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you have someone screaming prophetic warnings, the listener's intellect immediately raises its defensive shields. It starts arguing, categorizing, and dismissing.
So the podcast is engineered to provide a musical, meditative, auditory experience.
Exactly. The soothing voice of George Kite and the ambient soundscapes are designed to lower the modern listener's baseline anxiety, disarm their intellectual defenses, and guide them into a state of inner peace, where the spiritual message can be received directly by the soul.
They are using ambient audio to hack the nervous system, bypassing the deceptive intellect entirely.
Yeah, it's brilliant in its own way.
And this meditative approach sets the stage for what I consider the most empowering and structurally radical concept in their entire theology, their redefinition of the Messiah.
In the mainstream Jewish tradition, the Messiah, the Moshiach, is a distinctly hierarchical concept. It is the ultimate centralization of power.
Right.
The tradition waits for an elevated historical figure, a king from the Davidic line, who will arrive to unilaterally redeem the world, rebuild the temple, and establish global justice. The masses wait passively for the supreme leader to arrive.
But BABASHUVA completely shatters that model. They introduce a mandate that translates roughly to discover the Messiah within you.
This is the ultimate democratization of redemption. It takes the immense, concentrated power of the messianic concept and distributes it equally across every single human being.
BABASHUVA argues that redemption is not an external event that you wait for. It is an internal potential that you must actively unlock.
And it perfectly seals the architecture of their non-hierarchical vision.
Right, because if every individual possesses the messianic potential within themselves, the entire rationale for a religious or political hierarchy evaporates.
You don't need a supreme rabbi to intercede with God on your behalf.
You don't need a politician to engineer a utopian society.
And you don't need an institution to tell you how to be moral.
You only need to accept absolute personal responsibility, regulate your internal impulses, and genuinely see the fragile flesh and bone human standing in front of you. By activating your internal agency, you neutralize the power of every external institution.
It really is a profound paradigm shift.
Let's synthesize the sheer scope of the terrain we've covered today. We started with the deeply unconventional trajectory of Netan or Ben Zvi.
Right, tracking his evolution from a rigorous yeshiva environment to the hyper-quantified world of capital markets.
To the visceral empathy of welfare caregiving, ultimately resulting in a practical prophecy that embraces the fracturing of the mind as a conduit for truth.
And we examined the gravitational center of the movement, the ontological declaration that under the flesh we are all human.
We analyzed how this specific X-ray vision is designed to aggressively dismantle the complex tribalistic hierarchies of Israeli society, prioritizing the physical human over any ideological construct.
Then we navigated their massive theological bypass, witnessing how they discard 2,000 years of rabbinic tradition to return directly to the biblical text.
Replacing institutional control with a rigid, localized code of personal accountability. That visceral new decalogue that commands us not to shoot, not to stab, and equally not to surrender to the despair of crying.
And finally, we explored the pragmatic paradox of utilizing AI and ambient Spotify podcasts to infiltrate a digital world they consider an illusion.
All culminating in the radical decentralization of power through the discovery of the internal Messiah.
It is a jarring, intensely demanding blueprint for a completely altered reality.
It really is. As we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to process on your own.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the concept that continuously demands attention is BABASHUVA's assertion that the human intellect is our greatest deception.
Right.
We exist in a civilization that worships intellectualization. We construct massive, intricate mental frameworks to defend our political tribes, to justify our societal status, and to neatly categorize every person we encounter into a rigid hierarchy of value.
We use our brilliant intellects to build impenetrable walls between ourselves and others.
So the provocative question BABASHUVA forces us to ask is this: what if the most revolutionary, world-altering action you could take tomorrow requires absolutely no intellectual effort at all?
What would happen if, for one day, you actively bypassed your brain?
The next time you interact with someone, what if you refuse to analyze their political affiliations, their economic status, or their religious identity?
What if you forcefully shut down the diagnostic machinery in your head, looked at them, and permitted yourself to see nothing more than the fragile, vulnerable, flesh and bone human underneath?
Would that unmediated X-ray vision actually begin to clear the murky waters we're all drowning in?
It is a staggering challenge to carry with you the next time you are scrolling through your curated digital feeds or simply walking down a crowded street. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.